Hello, everybody. How are you tonight? And how are you, Dolores? First to arrive says hi all. Lana says hi all. Rainy Saturday here in Minneapolis. I think it might be cloudy here, but it seems to be pretty good. Go Start says shared. Thank you, Go Start. Okay. Also, Nancy Trzynski. Hope I pronounced that right. Says hello. Go Start says 70s and sunny, one day only. That sounds really good. Lana says I shared to Twitter. Hi, SG. Yes, SG indeed. Kay says, hi all, glad to see ya. Nasty tornadoes tonight from Illinois to Texas. Climate change is here, folks. Yeah, sometimes the weather gets very, very rough these days. Lana says, sunshine is good. We had gloom today. Better than snow, though. I'm sure it's a lot better. Terry says, hi, lovers and friends. And Russ says, the air was yellow here in Atlanta, Georgia today. It must be in honor of the voter suppression bill they passed. What an awful fascist bill that was. Amazing. Just amazing. Okay. So let us get to the business of the night. You, of course, have been hearing people say this fight over the filibuster is simply performative. The filibuster isn't really the problem. The problem is the total corruption of the system and the fact that the people in Congress are simply bought. And if they were not bought, we would not have the problem. On the other hand, if we get rid of the filibuster, we'll still have the problem due to the corruption. So, basically the story goes, while I'm for getting rid of the filibuster, of course, it's not really all that important, and I think all the attention that is being given to that is actually misplaced. Well, from my point of view, it is not misplaced. It is not misplaced because getting rid of the filibuster at this particular point is essential to making progress and most likely to passing quite a few bills that are important to beginning to get rid of some of the corruption in the system. So the way I look at the filibuster is that it's not a sufficient condition to get us the congressional action we need, but it is a necessary condition. It's the first step we have to take to begin to get the bills we need actually passed. You should be seeing my face on your system, honey.
I know, I'm trying to find it.
Refresh the page, and you should be able to get it. Okay. Russ says, when the pine trees drop their pollen, it's thick. Ah, yes, that is true. So, we have here some pieces on the filibuster. Then I have a message for you. Then I'm going to cover some other news. And And that's my program for tonight. So I'm going to share the first of the posts that I picked out. If I recall correctly, it's by William Rivers Pitt from Truth Out. And the title of it is, "There's a Path to Ending the Filibuster If Democrats Move Wisely." And what does that mean? Well, we'll find out in just a minute. There's Joe Biden cogitating over something. And William Rivers Pitt is the author of this piece, and it was done on March 25th at Truth Out. And Pitt starts off with, "There's something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear." Bonnie's laughing. There is a whole lot of happy noise coming out of the Biden administration lately. The sum and substance being that this White House, which has, quote, already been transformative, according to Axios. Oh, yeah, Axios. Doesn't take much to make Axios think something's transformative. Is looking to wrestle the historic New Deal and Great Society policy initiatives for their places in the history books. Quote, President Biden recently held an undisclosed East Room session with historians that included discussion of how big is too big and how fast is too fast to jam through once-in-a-lifetime historic changes to America, unquote, reads one report from Axios this week. And quote again, the historian's views were very much in sync with his own. It is time to go even bigger and faster than anyone expected. If that means chucking the filibuster and bipartisanship, so be it, unquote. A second Axios report was even bubblier. Quote, hosting historians around a long table in the East Room earlier this month, President Biden took notes in a black book as they discussed some of his most admired predecessors. Then he said to Doris Kearns by Goodwin, I am no FDR, but, unquote. He'd like to be, close quotes from the Axios report. This, of course, is This is, of course, a bomb to the ears of progressives who watched the last 50 years of right-bent, trickle-down economic plunder shred the country. However, it bears remembering that the 5 decades of damage we're facing down has come at the hands of giddily complicit Democrats nearly as often as it has the Republicans. 2 distinct parties became, in a sense, one big corporate party after the old Democratic coalition collapsed. Okay, a quote, centrist, unquote, party, if you mark the political center somewhere to the right of Richard Nixon. I've never marked the political center there, I'm afraid. Maybe that's just been the center of the mainstream news outlets. One party favored abortion rights, the other detested them. But when it came to worshiping at the church of supply-side neoliberal economics, quote, feed the rich, unquote, the two shared a pew and dipped greedily into the same corporate fattened donation basket. One of the avatars of that center-right, the Democratic transformation, is none other than President Biden. During his time as a senator, Mr. Biden championed draconian crime bills, drafted rather ruinous banking bills, and voted to allow catastrophic Republican follies like the invasion and occupation of Iraq. As recently as last September, Mr. Biden was unable to keep his story straight about that war vote and spent a good deal of his presidential campaign backpedaling vigorously away from much of his record. These are not attacks, quote unquote, on Mr. Biden. They're a recitation of black letter history. It is therefore no surprise to see furrowed brows decorating the progressive landscape when the senator from MBNA talks as though he has suddenly been transformed into some Roosevelt Johnson super being. Once bitten, twice shy. We've been bitten more often than the curator of an Arizona rattlesnake farm. Forgive us for being bluntly dubious in the face of such shiny talk. I'm sure you all feel that way, right? And yet the possibilities are enormous, aren't they? Esquire blogger Charles P. Pierce took a hard look 1 year ago not only at who Biden is, but who he could someday become. Maybe it wasn't such a hard look. But anyway, Charles Pierce said, quote, Biden has been a loyal party man. This led him, as did all loyal party folk, into some rather skeevy alliances. What's a skeevy alliance, by the way? With some more than skeevy people. What are skeevy people? I'm afraid I don't know. And it has led him to adopt positions that have come back to bite him, as a revived progressive wing asserted itself. That's the way it's supposed to happen. And Biden knows that as well as anybody. The main question going forward, especially for those progressive voters who are not necessarily Bernie or bust people, which I think most of us probably are, is how sincere do you believe Joe Biden is in his newfound adoption of positions that would have been unthinkable 20 years or 20 months before? If he thinks that's where the party's headed, he will go along. His history proves that he will, and that he likely will do it with gusto. End quote. Quote again, with gusto, unquote. Even for a crusty old campaigner like me, says Pitt. That line pops a few goosebumps. So, okay, let's say for the sake of argument that Biden means every word. Then he intends to take his slim majority in Congress and knock some shit down with it. Nothing would be more welcome. But the second question remains, how? At some point, says Pitt, the filibuster has to go, even in the face of Mitch McConnell's puny bluster. As it stands, a number of centrist Democrats and every single Republican are against this action, though the reticence of those Democrats has begun to waver in the face of the fact that the GOP intends to filibuster everything, including the sink in the men's room, in order to thwart Biden's agenda. Just 2 weeks ago, Biden himself sounded a lot like Joe Manchin when it came to filibuster reform. But if Axios has the right of it, the president has changed his tune dramatically. Angus King of Maine, an independent senator who caucuses with the Democrats, has likewise moved to the filibuster abolition camp, I'm not quite sure he's moved that far, by the way, folks. He seems to be also one of those talking about the talking filibuster, one kind of talking filibuster, okay, or another, because there are many variations of that, and the details are important in terms of whether the filibuster remains a tool for blocking legislation for very long. Now, remember, if you will, that the Reconstruction Bill itself is a way of slowing down reconciliation. It takes a long time to set up a reconciliation bill. And then there are the votoramas, and then the possible conferences. You know how long it took to get the first of the reconciliation bills in place. I mean, Biden came into office. Soon after, there was a majority, okay, of Democrats, and we didn't get a reconciliation vote for another month or so, right? So reconciliation is a way of slowing things down, too. It's arguable whether, if a talking filibuster is done in the right way, it would be able to slow down any legislation for more than a few days. Might take less time than freaking Reconstruction. Anyway, I digress. Going back to the quote, more pointedly, he, Angus King, that is, believes those senators who are hesitant to make this change will come around after watching serial GOP obstructionism upend vital bills like H.R. 1, the vast and historic voter protections bill that just passed the House on a straight party vote. I don't think I need to remind you, folks, that the voter suppression bill just passed in Georgia would be overwritten by the passage of H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, and Georgia would again be subject to seeking Department of Justice approval of any bills it passed that involved any voter suppression or anything having to do with voting. Going on with the article, though, even stubborn Joe Manchin may have his price regarding the filibuster, and more importantly, he may have already signaled what that price is. Quote, Senator Joe Manchin said Wednesday that he favors a large infrastructure package that would be paid for in part by raising tax revenues, unquote, reports NBC News. Quote, the point of contention between the two parties. But quote again, I'm sure of one thing. It's going to be enormous, unquote. The West Virginia Democrat, who's seen as a swing vote in a chamber divided 50-50, said to reporters at the Capitol, unquote. And William Rivers Pitt wants to know, is there room here for a deal? If Biden promises to go full bore on Manchin's massive infrastructure bill in exchange for Manchin and his cohort of, quote, centrists, unquote, in exchange for them agreeing to vote an end to the filibuster, it could be hats over the windmill. Clearly, we are not there yet, but I have a vision in my mind's eye that won't go away, says Pitt. In my vision, the filibuster remains intact for the Senate vote on H.R. 1, and the bill gets filibustered to death by McConnell or one of his underlings. Thus, the gauntlet is thrown. Senate Democrats then feed other enormously popular bills, gun background checks, say, or infrastructure, into the maw of the GOP filibuster. Blow by blow, bill by bill, it will become clear, even to the stoniest, quote, centrist, unquote, Democrat, that their own political aspirations will rise or fall on the ability simply to get things done. And then, as tensions peak, a House and Senate coalition led by the Congressional Black Caucus and fully supported by Mr. Biden. I don't know about the CBC folks. That's not in my mind's eye. It's more like the CPC. But anyway, fully supported by Mr. Biden, once again puts up H.R. 1 for a vote. Oh, I see why you mentioned the CBC. Well, maybe it will be led by the CBC. Once again puts H.R. 1 up for a vote. Their main argument? The hundreds of bills emerging nationwide that seek to obliterate the right to vote for people of color and for anyone else who does not reliably vote Republican. All eyes turn once again to the filibuster. And after all that, none can say. The way is there, however, 8 lanes wide and screaming for boldness. Who are you, Joe Biden? Are you going to be a president who prioritizes real human needs? If you are, we need you to fight now. Win first. Improve people's lives by way of desperately needed progressive progressive legislation, and wait for the light bulb moments to start flashing all over the country. And that, my friends, is William Rivers Pitt's latest contribution to the debate. Pretty nice one, I think. Next is a little something from The Intercept. Chuck Schumer tells labor leaders PRO Act gets a floor vote with 50 co-sponsors. Why does it need to have 50 co-sponsors to get a floor vote? In fact, will 50 co-sponsors get it a floor vote? No. Not unless they get rid of the filibuster or severely modify it. Because as soon as Chuck Schumer tries to get a floor vote on this, whether he has 40 co-sponsors, or whether he has 42 co-sponsors, or whether he has 50 co-sponsors, or whether he has even 51 or 52 co-sponsors, assuming the very unlikely assumption that some of the Republicans might actually come over for H.R. 1 or H.R. 4. I mean, maybe Romney or Lisa Murkowski, who may suddenly want to find herself a Democrat next year. I mean, it's perfectly possible the way things are going. If she gets a challenge from a Trumpist up in Alaska. But anyway, that may or may not happen. The point being, you can't get a floor vote without being able to shut off the filibuster with 60 votes under the present rules in the Senate. So let's go over this piece and see what they think old Chucky has in mind. Democrats will bring sweeping labor reform for a floor vote in the Senate if its backers can round up at least 50 co-sponsors. Chuck Schumer recently told AFL-CIO head Richard Trumka, according to 2 sources with knowledge of the conversation. The bill, which recently passed the House of Representatives, would represent the most serious reform of workplace and organizing rules in several generations. The Protecting the Right to Organize Act, known as the PRO Act, was introduced last month by Senator Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington, the 3rd-ranking Democrat in the Senate, who chairs the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee. The sources spoke on the condition, of anonymity to speak freely. A Schumer spokesperson declined to comment. President Joe Biden and Democratic leaders in Congress have praised the measure and called for its swift passage. The bill currently has 45 backers, leaving it 5 short of the target of 50. Who do you suppose those 5 are? Maybe Angus King? Maybe Maggie Hassan? Maybe Jeanne Shaheen? Maybe Joe Manchin? Maybe Chris Coons? Maybe Tom Carper? I don't know. Maybe Kirsten Sinema? We can probably easily find out just by looking at who the co-sponsors are. Then we would know who they were not. But in any case, the bill would strengthen collective bargaining rights, override so-called right-to-work laws, establish new penalties for corporations that violate workers' rights, and prohibit employers from taking action against unions striking in solidarity with workers at other companies. Think about how much easier, by the way, it would have been for the Amazon workers to get a union if this pro-bill were in place. Don't you think Amazon is offering the world to senators right now who are willing to vote against this pro-bill? The package is the top priority of the AFL-CIO this year, says Lacey and Grimm. But Trumka warned union members in January the bill would not pass without a fight, quote unquote. Labor leaders would face opposition from corporate America and most of the Republicans, he said, cautioning that even, quote, some Democrats will look for a way out, unquote. Democrats holding a slim majority in the Senate, passing the PRO Act would require reforming the filibuster, as the prospect of 10 Republican votes for a labor reform is beyond a fantasy. The number of high-profile Democrats joining the push to reform the filibuster has steadily grown, with Biden and Senator Joe Manchin endorsing unspecified changes to filibuster rules earlier this month. Peeling off Republican votes in support of the PRO Act is improbable, even as some in the GOP have positioned themselves as advocates for the working class amid a nationwide push to unionize workers at Amazon. Senator Senator Rubio, Florida, penned an op-ed in USA Today earlier this month endorsing the union push at Amazon, but he still does not support the PRO Act. Senator Josh Hawley, who's a Republican from the state of Missouri, has called for a criminal antitrust investigation into Amazon's data usage practices and introduced a bill last summer to eradicate, quote, slave labor, unquote, from the supply chain of large corporations. Last month, Hawley introduced an amendment to a budget resolution that would ban mergers and acquisitions by big tech companies. The senator has not signed on to the PRO Act. The bill's Senate co-sponsors include 44 Democrats and 1 independent. Only 4 Democrats in the caucus and 1 independent senator who caucuses with Democrats, Maine's Angus King, have not signed on to the bill. The other holdouts are Democratic Senators Kirsten Sinema and Mark Kelly, of Arizona, Joe Manchin, and Mark Warner of Virginia, my very own senator. I didn't know that. He's going to have to get a call. And I won't take any BS for an answer. Anyway, some of the usual suspects are there, specifically Sinema, but Joe Manchin and Angus King. Somehow, I have a feeling Angus King is going to come over, and I'm pretty sure Mark Kelly, is going to come over. I have a feeling all of those people are going to come over. A spokesperson, I'm surprised that Shaheen and Hassan are already over, and that Coons and Carper are already over. If they're already over, it must mean that Biden, at some level, is supporting the pro bill, at least for now. A spokesperson for King said that the senator was still deciding whether to sign on to the bill. Quote, he's interested in it and having conversations with main stakeholders and experts before making a final decision. Spokesperson Matthew Felling said to The Intercept in an email. Spokespeople for the other four senators did not respond to requests for comment. Some labor leaders have dismissed concerns that the bill won't be able to overcome a filibuster in the Senate. I say, first of all, let them filibuster to show the public where they're at. Jim Williams, General Vice President, Director of Organizing for the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, said to Jacobin in January. IUPAT, an AFL-CIO affiliate, is leading the campaign to get the bill to 50 votes and wasn't surprised by Schumer's message to Trumka, which the union said is consistent with its strategy to eventually get the bill passed. Quote, we support abolishing the filibuster, and we intend to campaign to make sure it gets abolished. But I think the first step in doing that is to get everyone in the Democratic caucus in the Senate on board with passing it first, said Ryan Kekaris, communications director at IUPAT, lead organizer on their campaign to pass the PRO Act, and a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. And DSA is part of an IUPAT-led coalition that also includes the Communication Workers of America, the Sunrise Movement, and the Working Families Party, and is conducting direct outreach to senators on the package, as well as mobilizing their constituents. The coalition's targets include Kelly, Sinema, Warner, Manchin, and King. Boy, Sinema is really making lots and lots of enemies, isn't she? She's just really... what's going through her head? Quote, we've made it clear for every senator that just saying you support the bill is not long enough. Is not enough. You have to also support a meaningful path to it becoming law. That includes getting over the hump of the filibuster, unquote, Kekaris said. Saturday night, DSA made more than 100,000 phone calls to voters in West Virginia, Arizona, Maine, and Virginia, Kekaris said to The Intercept. I know they filled up Kirsten Sinema's voicemail with people in support of the PRO Act. They did the same to Kelly's voicemail on Tuesday. We plan on doing that really to every senator, but primarily to those who are not on the record yet with supporting the bill, unquote. So there's a campaign going on. What Schumer is really saying then is that he's saying, you get me 50 co-sponsors, and then I will go to the floor with the vote. Because if I do that and they filibuster it, then I have a credible threat. Of making a point of order to get rid of the filibuster. I have a credible threat with 50 co-sponsors of using the nuclear option to get rid of the filibuster. And with Biden and Harris behind this, and with the 50 co-sponsors, one way or t'other, I can get this bill passed. Either the Republicans do not filibuster it, or if they do, they maybe lose the filibuster forever. That's at least one possible scenario here, but not the only scenario. Specifically, and we now make our way to the third piece here. This is by Andrew Perez and Julia Rock of the Daily Poster. It was picked up by Jacobin, and the title of it is, If Democrats Don't Kill the Filibuster, They're Screwed. And what was the date of it again? March 25th. And they say, quote, there are many reasons to end the filibuster. It is undemocratic. It has been abused. It has no constitutional foundation, and it empowers a tiny minority to stop anything. But maybe the best reason to get rid of the filibuster is this. That Mitch McConnell is one heartbeat away from becoming the Senate Majority Leader again. And the filibuster makes it impossible for Democrats to pass much of anything quickly, even though they could lose power at any moment. Many pundits are already suggesting the Democrats' control of Congress will only last until the 2022 midterm elections. But a single unforeseen Senate vacancy could instantly kill a once-in-a-generation opportunity to pass their agenda. From new gun regulations to a badly needed hike in the minimum wage, from voting rights legislation and new worker protections to a promised public option for health care insurance. Now, the Senate is split 50-50, and 10 Democratic senators are from states whose Republican governors could replace them with GOP appointees in the event they are rendered incapacitated by a health event. Within that group, 6 are over 70 years old. The pandemic has provided ample evidence that such health events can occur at any moment. That's especially true for septuagenarians and octogenarians. And while deaths of younger senators have been rare, 3 such casualties have occurred in the last 30 years. 12 months into Joe Biden's presidency, Democrats have passed 2 months into Joe Biden's presidency. What did I say, 12 months? 2 months into his presidency, Democrats have passed one major piece of legislation, a $1.9 trillion COVID-19 relief package. Democrats used the reconciliation process to pass the bill by a simple majority vote. But they cannot use the process for more legislation. Well, I don't know about that. I still think they can. They certainly can get one more reconciliation bill through if the Senate doesn't suddenly shift control, and if it doesn't take too long to get that particular bill through. But by the way, going through a process that now appears like it's going to take till July to pass something using reconciliation only magnifies the chances that they might lose control by July. I mean, if they want to minimize those chances, they got to start getting things done in the next 4 weeks. Really, time is a critical consideration here. Plus, the move comes with clear downsides, as it provided the basis for killing a $15 an hour minimum wage. It provided a rationale for killing the minimum wage. But obviously, Joe Biden did not want the minimum wage passed in that particular reconciliation bill under the circumstances. Now, maybe it was Joe Manchin's opposition. Maybe Biden will support it under other conditions. And maybe it was just that he was opposed to the minimum wage, and maybe he just didn't want to give Bernie the satisfaction of passing it. But he did have the power to ignore the parliamentarian and make the Republicans get 60 votes to kick the mini wage provision out of the reconciliation bill. But instead, he had Chuck Schumer put the amended bill onto the floor without the $15 an hour minimum wage in order to have to publicly show that he was backing the parliamentarian in this rather than actually backing labor and people who needed that $15 an hour minimum wage bill. Going on. The point is, say the author, the reconciliation process is not a real substitute for ending the filibuster. By preserving the filibuster, Democrats are choosing to allow Republicans to indefinitely block virtually all legislation outside of occasional spending bills unless they can win over 10 GOP votes. Garnering such Republican support seems like a fantasy, given the minority party's highly conservative and disciplined opposition. No Republicans voted for the Democrats' American Rescue Plan, even though it is wildly popular with the public. While Biden and conservative Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia have started publicly mulling some limited filibuster reform, a return to the, quote, talking filibuster, unquote, when you read about the idea, it quickly starts to sound unnecessarily complicated. There is also no indication yet that it would actually stop Republicans from blocking legislation for long periods of time. In fact, as I said before, it all depends on how the talking filibuster is structured. For example, it used to be that in the talking filibuster, someone could pick up the Bible and read page after page and page after page of the Bible. But a recent proposal about having the talking filibuster has said that you have to talk about a subject that is directly related to the bill under consideration. So if it passed in that form, or a form involving a talking filibuster, it might not take as long to pass bills as it would if you went back to the earlier conditions of a talking filibuster. But I digress. In truth, spending any time at all considering such half measures could prove disastrous, and at least one report suggests some Biden aides are starting to appreciate this. Quote, people close to Biden tell us he's feeling bullish on what he can accomplish and is fully prepared to support the dashing of the filibuster rule to allow Democrats to pass voting rights and other trophy legislation for his party, unquote. I'm glad he's interested in trophy legislation, because the Democratic Party certainly needs some trophies after all the mess it's made over the last 40 years. Anyway, quoting again from Axios, his team sees little chance he's going to be able to rewire the government in his image if he plays by the rules of bringing in at least 10 Republicans, unquote. If that anonymously sourced story proves right, a big if, it would be good news, because right now Democrats are wasting time they don't have. They're hemming and hawing over the filibuster is needlessly stalling the implementation of huge swaths of their agenda during what could be the only brief opportunity they have during Biden's presidency to put their platform into law. Their majority is so razor thin, after all, that it could end at literally any moment. Democrats controlled the presidency, the House of Representatives, and the Senate from 2009 to 2010 during Obama's first 2 years as president. And they only regained full control in Washington this year after Senators Warnock and Ossoff won their runoff races in Georgia. But the party's grip on the Senate is exceedingly narrow. Yes, and by the way, has to be said, with the new voter suppression bill in Georgia, there's probably very little chance for Warnock to win in 2022 unless H.R. 1 is passed. It makes the passage of H.R. 1 now even more urgent. In other words, the new voter suppression bill in Georgia wasn't a reality until a couple of days ago. It was certainly a possibility, but it wasn't a reality. Now it's down to a reality, and Manchin has to face the fact that even if nobody dies, that probably the Democrats will lose control of Congress, because Senator Warnock will probably be defeated under the new bill. If they lose control of Congress, then Joe Manchin loses his chairmanship of the committee. I think it's the Resources and Energy Committee that he currently chairs, a very important committee in the Congress and a big source of his power in the Senate. But to go on with the article, the party's grip on the Senate is exceedingly narrow. The chamber is split 50-50, with Democrats relying on VP Kamala Harris to break tie votes. In effect, any unexpected personal health crisis among key Democratic lawmakers is a political emergency imperiling the party's hold on the Senate. In January, days after Democrats took power in Washington, Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy was briefly hospitalized. Leahy, who's 80, said he had, quote, had some muscle spasms, unquote. I hope he's taking his potassium citrate, and was given, quote, a clean bill of health, unquote. Bernie Sanders, Vermont's other senator, is 79 and had a heart attack during his presidential campaign last year, as we all know, and he appears to be still working as hard as ever He was down in Alabama campaigning today for the Amazon workers. Vermont Governor Phil Scott is a Republican, and he would have the power to appoint a replacement, one who would likely be from his party if either of the state senators were unable to finish their terms. 4 other Democratic senators who are older than 70 represent states with GOP governors that have the power to make appointments to fill Senate vacancies. Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, Senators Warren and Markey of Massachusetts, and Manchin in West Virginia. In all, 34 Senate Democrats out of the 50 Senate Democrats are at least 60 years old. Democrats should know full well how perilous their majority is. In 2009, 77-year-old Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy's death from brain cancer ended the party's 60-seat filibuster-proof majority and nearly tanked Democrats' health care reform law, the Affordable Care Act. After Republican Scott Brown unexpectedly won the election to replace Kennedy, Democrats were forced to pass a version of the Affordable Care Act that had already been approved by the Senate and only made light changes a few months later using the reconciliation process. After a gunman killed 10 people this week at a grocery store in Boulder, Colorado, reportedly using an AR-15 style pistol modified with an arm brace, quote unquote, Biden demanded that Congress pass new gun regulations immediately. Quote, I don't need to wait another minute, but let alone an hour to take common sense steps that will save lives in the future, and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act, he said Tuesday, calling for Congress to ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines, as well as expand background checks. None of those ideas are likely to garner substantial Republican support, even if Democrats were to water them down. Until Democrats eliminate the filibuster, any talk of new gun rules is meaningless and should be treated as such. The same can be said of most of Democrats' policy agenda, including the items they're emphasizing in Congress right now. The party's democracy reform and voting rights legislation, H.R. 1, isn't going anywhere with the GOP able to block it. And statehood for Washington, D.C. certainly isn't either, neither is statehood for Puerto Rico. According to The Intercept, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer is saying to union leaders that Democrats will bring their landmark labor legislation to protecting the right to organize, PRO Act, to the floor once it has at least 50 co-sponsors. But the chance that 10 or more Republicans will support the bill is close to non-existent. Democrats aren't talking much these days, not talking much about a public health insurance option, which Biden pitched as an alternative to Medicare for all. Instead, they opted to use their COVID bill to deliver tens of billions of dollars to health insurance companies in order to put people on the private insurance plans, which are mediocre at best. But if Democrats are ever going to get serious about passing a public option, they would surely have to do it without any Republican votes. Democrats would also likely have to significantly scale back their proposed $15 an hour minimum wage hike in order to win any GOP support on the issue. That would mean shortchanging workers who have been paid too little for years. Increasing the minimum wage isn't some ideological wish list item. The federal minimum wage of $7.25 has been in place since 2009, and it's worth less today than it's ever been, according to research by the Federal Reserve. The people most impacted by this long-delayed wage increase are also the ones who have borne the brunt of the nation's year-long medical emergency. A recent Brookings Institution study found that essential workers during the COVID pandemic, quote, comprised approximately half, 47% of all workers in occupations with a median wage of less than $15 an hour. Democrats, in other words, have a moral obligation to fulfill their promise to raise the minimum wage immediately, because it will not happen in a McConnell-led Senate. They similarly have a moral obligation to protect people's voting rights, since Republicans around the country are working diligently, I'd even say frantically, to make it much harder to vote. According to a Brennan Center report last month, lawmakers in 43 states, quote, have carried over, pre-filed, or introduced 253 bills with provisions that restrict voting access, unquote. But Democrats can't move quickly on any of these pressing items with the filibuster in place. In fact, one of the few things they can do with their 51-vote majority is to change the Senate rules and eliminate the filibuster. And that might be the only way to put all and maybe any of these other ideas into law. Conservative Democrats' interest in preserving the filibuster, combined with GOP intransigence, led Democrats to use the reconciliation process to pass their COVID relief bill by a majority vote. Reconciliation is a process historically only used once or twice per year, and it allows the Senate parliamentarian to weigh in and recommend tossing measures that aren't budget items. In February, the parliamentarian Elizabeth McDonough advised Senate Democrats that their $15 an hour wage provision wasn't budget related and shouldn't be part of their pandemic aid bill. And by the way, this was even after the CBO came forward and said that it was budget related, that it had a significant impact on the budget. I mean, her decision was ridiculous and arbitrary in that light. While Democrats have the power to ignore McDonough's opinion, a process requiring only 41 votes, or replace her, like the Republicans did in 2001, when the parliamentarian was not ruling their way. They chose to do neither. Actually, it was the president and the vice president and Chuck Schumer who refused to do neither. Sanders has been arguing that Democrats can use the reconciliation process more often, and he's now pushing to use it to pass a series of measures designed to lower drug prices. But Sanders' strategy could ultimately rely on Democrats ignoring the parliamentarian, something his colleagues do not seem interested in doing. In short, this seems like a futile and frustrating way to try to write policy when Democrats should really just end the filibuster. If Democrats genuinely want to enact new gun regulations or pass any of their broader policy priorities, they can't waste any more time debating such pointless matters. They control the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and their caucus is just large enough to vote to kill the filibuster tomorrow if their members wanted to, and they should want to as soon as possible. Democrats have all the structural power they need to pass their promised agenda today. They might not have that power tomorrow. So, that piece, I think, was very important because it emphasizes the time element, how much of an emergency this actually is. Now, getting back to the point that getting rid of the filibuster would be primarily performative, and that the whole fight over the filibuster is primarily performative. I think that point of view neglects what it would look like, what the situation in the Senate would look like if the filibuster was gone. In other words, the dynamics of trying to pass some of these bills would be entirely different. The argument has been made that, look, for the minimum wage bill, 8 of the Democrats voted against it. They didn't even have the 50 votes. That is a misconstruction of what actually happened. What actually happened there was that Chuck Schumer amended the House reconciliation bill. The House bill never got to the floor. Those 8 senators never voted against the House bill containing the $15 an hour provision. That would have required, under reconciliation, only the 51 votes to pass. But the 8 Democrats were not forced into being in that position. Harris was not forced into being in that position, into being the deciding vote for the reconciliation bill. Biden characterized that as a must-pass bill. Had the minimum wage provision been in that bill, the leverage would have been on the side of passing the minimum wage provision, because only 51 votes were required to do that, and that would have meant that every one of those 8 Democrats would have been under pressure to pass it. Biden and Harris would have been under pressure to pass it with the minimum wage as part of the bill. No way Coons and Carper would have voted against the bill then. No way Hassan would have voted against the bill. Shaheen would have voted against the bill. No way Manchin would have voted against the bill then. I don't think any of them would have voted against, would have risked being one of the 50 or 2 of the 50 who killed that $1.9 trillion bill with the minimum wage in it. And if it had come down to a 50-50 tie with Harris set to cast a deciding vote, no way would Biden have gone along with the parliamentarian. And Biden, by the way, had an easy out. His easy out was simply, he said that he respected the advice of the parliamentarian. He never said he would take that advice. And neither did Harris ever say she would take that advice if she had been put to the test and Biden had been put to the test. No, they were protected by Schumer. All 8 of the Democrats and Biden and Harris were protected by Schumer. And not only protected by Schumer, they were protected by Sanders, who did not immediately announce to Schumer, when Schumer was doing the amendment, that if Schumer put in that amendment, that Bernie was not voting for the reconciliation bill. If Bernie had dared to throw his weight in at that point, Schumer would never have taken the minimum wage out of the reconciliation bill. They would have screamed to high heaven. They would have been very unhappy, at Bernie. But Bernie had the power to force them to the wall on this and to overcome the opposition of Manchin and those other senators if he had done it, if he had stood up strong in that situation. The House Democrats had the same power. They could have forced a conference between the House and the Senate. So this wasn't a clear situation. it wasn't a clear situation. Why not? Because once the reconciliation bill without the minimum wage part in it came to the floor, once that came to the floor, and Bernie tried to put back the minimum wage provision into the bill, that then required 60 votes. And the 8 Democrats who voted against it could always say, well, we were not the deciding votes against this. It was going to require 60 votes. And there was no way the Republicans were going to vote to put it back into the reconciliation bill. They were going to vote against that, which meant it couldn't pass anyway. So there was no way that I was going to put myself in a difficult position with respect to the donors if the bill wouldn't pass anyway, if the amendment wasn't going to pass anyway. In other words, that vote, which some of the people who are saying the filibuster doesn't matter use as evidence that the filibuster doesn't matter because 8 of the Democrats were against it, that was not a true test of their being against it in a crunch type of situation where their votes were needed to get to 50. Getting to 60 is not the same as getting to 50. It's not the same from a pressure standpoint. It's not the same from a campaign standpoint. It's not the same from a force the vote standpoint. If you only got to get 50 votes, force the vote is much more doable if you want to win. But if you force the vote when 60 votes are needed, it's much less effective. Much less effective. Imagine the filibuster is not present, that it's gone, or that it's not really, say it can block things for 5 days. It's like that, but it can't go longer than 5 days. Now, let's say it's something like that. In other words, they can talk it up for 5 days, but then it ends. Something like that. If we have something like that, at the end of those 5 days, there's a floor vote. It's crunch time. And the minimum wage bill, a clean minimum wage bill, is up there. And it takes then only 51 votes to pass it. The 50 senators' votes and the vice president's votes. And Biden is still on record saying he supports the $15 an hour minimum wage. And some of those Democrats also claimed in their campaigns that they support the $15 an hour minimum wage. Even Kyrsten Sinema was saying the other day that she would support an immediate rise in Arizona to $11 an hour, which is no big deal on her part because Arizona has already passed the minimum wage of $11.25 or $11.15. I forget the exact figure. So her saying we could immediately raise the national wage to 11, I don't mind. That's nothing. But she also put in the key critical condition when she was talking about that. She said she would accept that and accept it to be indexed further. And the people thinking through indexing and the likelihood of inflation are saying that in that case, we'd have a $15 an hour minimum wage by 2024, which is a year before what was in the minimum wage bill that just got beat. That had $15 an hour coming in 2025. So Sinema was even willing to move it faster, at least to claim that. So she went on the record saying that. What happens if that came up for a clean vote? It would be much, much easier to get those 51 votes for the minimum wage bill. It does make a difference In that instance, it makes a difference. If you want to get through gun legislation, it makes a difference. If you want to get through H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, so you block the voter suppression and gerrymandering that's going on, absolutely essential if you want to have any chance of blocking the Republicans in 2022. And by the way, you know what happens to the climate emergency if they take over again in 2023. It goes by the board. At least Biden is fixing to do something about the climate emergency, do some things that would actually be substantive. We can see that taking shape, and we can see Democrats at large starting to support a part of that. All of that becomes possible, even probable, if the filibuster is not there. People who are saying it doesn't matter are not imagining the political situation when only 50 votes are required in order to get the vice president to be the tying vote. They're not imagining that. They're not letting you think. They're making arguments that don't take into account what the immediate political situation would be like when only 50 votes are needed. Sure, they have the donors. Sure, a lot of them are corrupt. There's no question about that. But they still have appearances to be maintained. And they've made some promises. And there's a movements organizing not simply on Twitter, but in election district after election district all over the country to pass Medicare for all, to pass H.R. 1 and H.R. 4, and to pass gun control legislation, and to pass Green New Deal legislation. There's grassroots campaign organized in state after state, district after district, in all these areas, supporting change. If you only need 50 votes for those changes, those key senators standing in the way are going to be much more pliable in spite of their donors, because their heads would be on the chopping block in many cases in 2022, and certainly later. So they're not considering the dynamics of the new political situation if the filibuster is not necessary, if the filibuster is not there, if it's no longer there. It also changes the political situation. If the filibuster is there, then in the election of 2022, even if people work hard to create a Democratic majority of 53 to 47 or 54 to 46, then what happens? Still 60 votes are needed. Still the same BS applies. Whereas if the filibuster doesn't apply anymore, then you can say to people, we need that control of the Senate. It's even surer we'll be able to get all these bills through if you elect some people who are in favor of change. We ourselves, pushing progressive candidates, can more easily campaign for those progressive candidates, because if we get them elected and they join the fight for the changes we would like to see, people won't have to be discouraged by contemplating that even if we get them in, they won't be able to do that much because the filibuster. Getting rid of the filibuster can make a tremendous difference. getting rid of the filibuster is a necessary condition for change. It may not be sufficient, but if we want to create the sufficient conditions that can cause change, we need the necessary condition out of the way. That is very, very important. And I want to leave you with the following thoughts on this particular question. After that, I'll briefly consider just a couple of news items, but they don't have to do with the filibuster per se. What I think should be done right now by all of us is to withhold all contributions, all small dollar contributions from people like us for Democratic candidates. And also withhold all contributions from the fundraisers for H.R. 1, H.R. 4, the statehood bills, the minimum wage bills, the Medicare for All bills, the gun control bills, or any others that can't be passed by using the reconciliation process until the Democratic Party gets rid of the filibuster. Because that fundraising, without getting rid of the filibuster, is a fraud, since it is not possible to pass these bills until the filibuster is gone. And the fundraising messages all implicitly assume that it is possible to pass them without getting rid of the filibuster. So shut them down on contributions right now until they get rid of the filibuster. Shut down Manchin, shut down Sinema, but shut them all down until they get rid of the filibuster. Collective punishment is needed right now for the whole party, so we can bring party pressure to bear on the minority of senators who want to keep the filibuster. Give them the message: the Democratic Party isn't viable as long as the filibuster is still there. The best way to deliver that message is with money. Shut down all the contributions until then. That's my recommendation. So, here are the two last bit of news items. It's Bernie. He's pushing to expand Medicare by lowering the eligibility age in the next relief package, says Jake Johnson yesterday in Common Dreams. He's pressuring Democratic lawmakers to use the forthcoming multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure package to significantly expand Medicare by lowering the eligibility age from 65 to either 55 or 60, an idea Joe Biden floated on the campaign trail on the last April. So, Bernie also wants to extend Medicare's coverage to often expensive services such as dental work, glasses, eye surgeries, and hearing aids, according to Politico. And Bernie talks about the structural problems, of course, and the infrastructure and the affordable housing. He's talking about packaging all these things. So, let me introduce a question right now. Let's say Bernie is successful in getting that into the reconciliation bill, and you know he's talking to Jay Powell and the Congressional Progressive Caucus in the House to include the Medicare for All bill with the proviso that the eligibility age is lowered from 65 to either 55 or 60, and put that in the infrastructure package that they want to pass through the reconciliation process. Let's say Jayapal goes along and she gets Pelosi and the rest of the House, to go along. And the House passes it and it gets to the Senate. What stops things? What will stop the same kind of scenario from developing there that we just saw with respect to the minimum wage? What will prevent Chuck Schumer from amending the bill before it reaches the floor and stripping the Medicare for All provision out of it? What's going to stop that? Why won't we see exactly the same thing? With the parliamentarians say, oh, that doesn't really belong in this bill because it's not a budgetary item. And Biden saying, I'll respect to the parliamentarian. What's different? What's different? And then, when Schumer sets out to amend the bill, so it's more acceptable to the parliamentarian and to the White House and to dissenters like Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema and others who get a lot of money from the pharmaceutical companies. What is then going to stop Chuck Schumer from amending the bill, at that point, and just taking it right out of the bill? And then Bernie and the House Democrats will be faced with the same kind of leverage. We had to vote for it because it's such a good bill. It's such a good bill. Outside of that, no. We don't want to see another one of the scenarios we saw with respect to the minimum wage bill. What we want to see instead is that the filibuster goes, that we don't have to live with it anymore. We don't have to distort things anymore with complicated Senate processes due to the filibuster. I lied. I guess I said this had nothing to do with the filibuster. Actually, it does, because it has to do with reconciliation. And if the filibuster were to go, we would not need any reconciliation. The other news item, I wanted to alert you to, was a column from Dave Dayen, who answered some questions concerning the pandemic. He addresses the transcript of the news conference, that Biden had, takes up the question of whether we have ended, the pandemic. The COVID cases have come down, and that, is very good. However, the moving average has ticked up of new cases, has ticked up slightly over the past few days, and it's basically been flat now for close to 3 weeks. In other words, it's not declining anymore. Infections are rising in a majority of states. However, in some cases by as much as 30%. Dave points out that's not entirely bad. As vaccinations rise, particularly among the elderly, cases become less of a barometer of how we're doing. About 80% of the deaths from COVID come from the population over 65, and 71% of them have gotten at least one dose of vaccine, with nearly 45% fully vaccinated. A case can be bad without being fatal, but as more at-risk people get vaccinated, the trends of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths ought to pull away from one another. So he asks, are people dying? People are still dying at about the peak rate of the summer surge. This is way down from the winter carnage, but it's still about 1,000 fatalities a day. This has also flattened out over the past week after a significant drop. Hospitalizations have also flattened out, and it's welcome to see this, but they're continuing to go down, only slightly though. We just haven't vaccinated quite enough of the population to see real changes. Dave then points to the moving average, the 7-day moving average of 2.5 million shots a day. I want to supplement that with another comment. Friday's figure for vaccinations was 3.4 million. They've actually now hit 3 million a day. I'm not saying it's going to average that over the next week, but we'll see. The numbers are likely to keep going up as age limits for vaccination are lowered or they're revoked. By the way, we just learned everyone in California will be eligible by April 15th. That puts us at around the 75% mark by maybe July in terms of the vaccinations. And that's where we need to get to. He says, however, the trajectory is likely to surge throughout April and May and then drop off as hesitant people waver on getting the jab. Some of this isn't really about the vaccine, but about the mechanism to have an appointment, which inevitably includes using the internet. Eventually, we'll hit a point where demand will drop, but not now. So the real question for the Biden team is how they're bridging the digital divide and making the vaccine accessible to all. He thinks that's a good question. The administration recently announced a $10 billion investment in high-risk communities, although getting people an appointment wasn't on the list of that funding. He says, I know the administration wants to do a federal sign-up, but that won't be released until the 1st of May, at least. So he asked the question, will we have enough vaccine? You'd think the answer is absolutely, especially now that the AstraZeneca vaccine, after some hiccups about what data it was giving to the public, is showing results that should approve it for use in the U.S. He says there's a strange lack of take-up on the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the only one-shot vaccine approved, which would really help and tougher to vaccinate communities. He says states appearing to be hoarding J&J doses until they have enough to institute a mass program to reach the underserved. This is a rerun of the equity question that hobbled early rollout somewhat. Okay, I thought you could use a little bit of that news. And so now I'm going to end what I have to say for tonight and turn to your comments. Thank you for sticking around. And here we are, back to the beginning. Carmen says, sharing and inviting, be right back. Ross Goldman says, when the pine trees drop their pollen, it's thick. Carmen says, oh, honey is here. Hi, Bonnie. Kay says, the body waves, Carmen. Kay says, sing it, Joe. Laugh out loud. Ghost Art says, just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a wasteful trip that started as a photo op aboard this tiny ship. Terry Burke says, quote, Joe Manchin defends the filibuster, but eliminating it could make him the most powerful senator here. And Terry Burke shares a piece from Smart News. suggesting that just eliminating it could make him the most powerful senator. Ghost Art says Ted Cruz was a lying liar lad, and Graham was so impure. These dumb fuckers set sail that day for a fearmonger's tour. A fearmonger's tour. Terry says, hence all the ammo, sexual, gun violence, quote, existential crisis. Human penises are shrinking due to pollution, warns scientist here. And another item from Smart News. Ghost Start says, skeeve, adjective, unpleasant, squalid, or distasteful. Thank you, Ghost Start. Kay says, if any man has only his penis to brag about, he's a sorry guy, in my opinion. And Lana says, I am multitasking. I won't be able to type too much. That's okay, Lana. Carmen says, gun mania is directly related to overcompensating for shortcomings, says Carmen. Kay says, so is rape and assault. Carmen Muniz, I'd much rather have a man that has a mind to think clearly. Kay says, hi, Evelina Pont. Evelina says, we all have shortcomings. Not all grab a gun to compensate. Exactly, Evelina. Says Kay, and Carmen says, Evelina Pont, just to clarify, the term shortcomings in my com doesn't mean the literal, quote, shortcomings, unquote. Carmen says, in my comment. Terry Burke says, laugh out loud. I caught that right away, Carmen. Out with the old. English Theocrat says hello. Hello, Theocrat. And Terry Burke says, yep, the point escapes too many, and that's why there's no progress. Carmen Muniz, Evelina says to Carmen, but seriously, I don't think it is that. It's more about very violent people. Kay says, my point was different than yours, Carmen Muniz. Mine is from real life. Carmen says, so is mine. Kay says, you aren't old enough to be where I have lived. Carmen says, I'm almost 40. I have some valid experience under my belt, though we have to struggle under boomer fuckery. Independent Left says, hey, Joe, been a while. Hi, Indie Left. Good to see you here. Kay says, I have two exes. One my age and one 8 years younger. Neither one had a brain that worked. That is why they're exes. My Scott had a brain until cancer took it. Scott and I were together for over 20 years. Kay says, I'm done here. Carmen says, what does all that have to do with the price of butter? Nothing has to do with any comment, any topic being discussed here from your comment. I think you're too enmeshed in Scott. My parents both died tragically, but I don't talk about it. Every other comment. Carmen, that was unkind. Kay says, I'm done, Carmen, and have unfriended you. When you have a partner in life for over 20 years and he dies, you might understand. But then again, you might not. And Terry said, my parents lived until I was 25. What's your point? And Kay says, but never mind, I'm done. Carmen says, right, we all have losses. Oh, I'm sorry I didn't see this discussion. I would have immediately cut it off. It is far too personal. Carmen says, I don't care if you unfriend me. But denial isn't just a river in Egypt. Kay says, I guess I'm not allowed to have my own opinion. You are perfectly allowed, Kay. You are perfectly allowed. And Carmen says, but you can say what you want to, and so can I. No, Carmen. Within limits, you can say what you want to, but we don't want to have any personal fights here. This is about the politics of it. Evelina says, Carmen Muniz, are you sure you're going on 40? Carmen laugh out loud. Evelina smiles. Kay says, I will not be harassed on here. And Terry says, Kay Clark Ryan, you're always, quote, done here, unquote. You can't control the narrative, or if someone doesn't pander, do it. Okay, bye. Kay, so now you know why I come on here anymore, Steve says. Evelina Pont, is that the boomer age? Steve says, don't, sorry. Terry says, Steve Wolfbrand, I guess you forgot that you start the shit, Terry Burke says. Kay says, I love most of you and Joe and Barney, but Carmen and Terry Burke are more than I can take. Steve Wolfbrand. Oh, people, you shouldn't get into this kind of thing. It just doesn't work. It just does not work. Carmen says, Terry Burke, yeah, he won't admit how he just loves to poke the bear. Steve said, I thought you said fart. Laugh out loud. Evelina says, Terry Burke, adolescents, laugh out loud. Carmen says, sorry, I guess we're from a take no shit generation. Steve says, Carmen should leave Kay alone. Kay is a super sweet person and doesn't need that shit. Kay says, you are from the we think we know it all generation. Kay Clark Ryan, Terry says, speaking up is not harassment. It's discussion. It's discussion, but it's personal discussion. And personal discussion is inappropriate for civil communications within a political context. What you need to do is keep away from the personal. Stick to the issues. The issues are what's important. The candidates are important. The movements are important. But we don't want to discuss things about our personal lives. Evelina says, no, too old for that, laugh out loud. Terry Burke, Carmen says to Terry Burke, playing victim is the name of the game. Steve says, goodbye. Carmen says, bye. Carmen says, okay, back to the show. No more Scott. Distraction. By Steve Wolfbrand. Love ya. And Kay says, GFY. And Carmen says, no, I don't. That's just your projection. Sorry, Joe. Great info, but I'm out of here. I'm tired of the harassment. I love you. I usually say that we love you as well, Kay. And we do. Okay. But we really have to avoid getting into these particular discussions. Okay. And I know you only mentioned your own experience, Kay. Okay. And that's fine. But it's really not appropriate for others to comment on it. I don't think.
No personal attacks.
Huh?
No personal attacks.
Yeah, no personal attacks, Bonnie says. And she's right. Personal attacks are really out of order here. Evelina says, good point, but Dr. Joe. They still have appearances to keep up, even if they have donors. Carmen Muniz says, getting rid of the filibuster means getting rid of oppression. Terry says, Carmen Muniz, yeah, I see that. Steve Wolfman says, but that bitch is a tyrant. Come on, Steve. Stop that nonsense. Carmen says, Trumpists and Republicans are competing for donations. It'd be great, okay, if the progressives could find a way to exploit that weakness. And Carmen says, Wolfbrand, you better not be calling me a batch. Because if anyone on here harassed and bullied anyone, it's by you, and you have the nerve to play victim. Carmen says, bitch correction. Evelina says, bridging the digital divide is vital. Would think they would have that worked out by now. Evelina says, must be on purpose. And Russell says, how did selfishness become conflated with liberty? And that's been coming for a long time, Russ. Selfishness became conflated, okay, with liberty by Ayn Rand. The hero of the right. And Dolores says, I love everyone here. Kay says, thank you, Joe. I love you. Thank you, Kay. But we love you too. Ghostart says, Prince Philip named as world's sexiest dead man. The Royal Pamper Mag reports. My God. How awful. Okay, folks, I've reached the end of my commentary. Steve Day just arrived. Late, very late am I. Thank you for that heart, Steve. Well, I think you missed a very good one, so you probably want to look at the video. But we are now just about all done. I've gone through all the comments, so I'm going to say good night to everyone. And I'll see you later, alligators.